Have you ever wondered how professional artists bring games to life? If you have, once again, take a seat right here. And I'll tell you once again for free, greatness isn't just about graphics. It's about so much more than that. And today I'm reacting to another Call of Duty 4 mission. This is Charlie Don't Surf. And it's such a great level, but so different to All Gillied Up and a lot of the more intimate ones. But it's equally brilliant in its artistic execution. And I'm going to break it down for you. Let's get into the artistry that's going on here. So we're starting off with a completely different opening sequence here. And it's really immediately highlighting the difference between the two halves of the campaign. When you're playing the more intimate sort of SAS missions. And then this one, you got the more sort of your small cog in a big machine, freedom, eagles screeching, cheeseburgers everywhere. This is the most American mission that I've ever seen in my life, but I love it. And immediately from the outset, artistically, we're highlighting that difference, right? We got so many helicopters, loads of action, but a lot of artistic stuff that's going in to back that up and really sell the sort of the mood and narrative of this mission.
Taking fire here.
Roger that. We've got RPGs down there.
So really what we're showing here is, the point I'm getting at is the scale of war, right? This is like in Cloverfield where the Americans all come running in guns blazing to shoot the clover, right? Once again, this is psychological. It's not just visual. So there's so much stuff going on here that we can react to straight away. So flying along, but how do you execute like big spaces like this when you're in environment heist? Well, the answer really is pretty much one thing, and that is prefabs. So what prefabs are, they are like kind of self-contained sort of mini levels that contain like a building, for example. And in that level, when you make that prefab, you'll go in, you'll make the building, you'll add all the detail to it. And then essentially you've got like a little package that you can then duplicate around and quickly sort of populate big areas like this. So, buildings are one example of that, but prefabs work at pretty much any scale. And in this level, maybe I don't know, I'm going to completely guess there's maybe 20 odd building prefabs or something that have been made. And then these will be just, duplicated around to quickly fill out the level. But speed isn't just the only thing that comes with prefabs. You're also getting consistency. And consistency is the key thing in environment art, particularly. And it's something that a lot of games these days are kind of missing, that sort of cohesion and consistency. Because when things are not consistent, everything kind of just feels off and a little kind of unprofessional and gamey. And that's normally because a lot of artists will just kind of have different approaches, and they'll be using the same sort of assets, but they'll use them in slightly different ways. And when that happens and those things are next to each other, you kind of really notice the sort of patchwork look that I like to call it. And basically prefabs kind of help to eliminate that, because it means every artist will be using the same sort of buildings, because they've just been made, and you don't want to waste time making something that's already been made. So you just kind of take these, copy paste them around, and yeah, you end up getting like this consistent look. But yeah, huge time saver, also helps artistically. So definitely, if you're an environment artist, get familiar with those. Or if you're a budding environment artist, kind of get used to that workflow, right? So depth. It's a word that I'm going to throw around a lot, but that's because it's like very critical to kind of selling games. Depth is kind of achieved mainly through this thing called Parallax, right? Which is essentially layering up of foreground, midground, and background elements. So if we go back a bit, let's see if we can find something that's perfect. So parallax essentially means that things close to camera move more than stuff further in the background, right? It's kind of like the stars in the sky, right? No matter how much you move back and forth, I'm sure we all tried as a kid to make the stars move. Never going to happen. It's because they're really far away, so they appear to not move. Whereas stuff in the foreground will start moving, right? And this is key to racing games, right? It gives that illusion of depth, but also it creates the illusion of speed, right? Which is another thing here, because these helicopters are not flying at 150 miles an hour or 200 miles an hour through the level, because otherwise they'd be out of bounds in about 2 seconds. So what you do is you essentially put things close to camera, And as those things move past the camera, they appear to move really quickly. So the palm trees, the buildings here, this flight path is deliberately arted, right? Because, you know, the artists will know, okay, the helicopter's flying down this path, so that means I need to place stuff close to camera here to make it feel like the helicopter's moving, but also create depth. You know, these buildings, palm trees, foreground elements, then you kind of got that water tower in the midground and other buildings, and then in the background you got like these pylons, you know, aerials, whatever. Those are your background elements that don't move as much and really create that final layer of parallax. And then obviously you can then interweave smoke and particles into that to add further motion and chaos, and also kind of cover up things. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors in games where you'll often things, if something doesn't look good, you just cover it up with like a particle or a smoke effect or something like that. Here we are. Getting into the meat and potatoes now, the mission. Love this. So we've already I've talked about hard barriers and soft barriers before, and how, you know, they're a very sort of, you know, the boundaries of a map and the boundaries of a level. It's a very difficult thing to manage. But here you kind of see them, you know, this is a narrative meeting environment art thing again, where you see the hard barrier, you know, this barbed wire, you're creating the language in the player's mind that, okay, barbed wire barrier, that means I can't go down there. I need to go take a different path. So, you know, now you're seeing it like visually in the map, it's being rolled out. You no longer question it because you've seen it being deployed. You know why that stuff is there. So, you know, it's little details like that are what kind of make games immersive, right? You can see it on the left here. You don't question that anymore. You don't go near it because you know, right? Here we go, a little bit of pacing rest, a little bit of peace and quiet before we dip back into the chaos. Also, you know, some people ask me about this, which is why doors are so big in games. And the answer is it's just gameplay, right? Small doors don't feel good to play around or go through, right? In 2019 Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Clean House had accurate scale doors, right? And it felt so different, and it arguably felt better. But, you know, for single player, that's fine. In multiplayer, you know, the doors are always going to be bigger, you know, and obviously in this game, the doors are unified across both modes. But yeah, it's just about space and be able to play through them easily.
Blow the charge. Breaching! Go! Clear!
Really nice set dressing in here. Nice sort of clear path to the continuation of the mission. Even then you had like little details on the floor there where the door was like grinding against the floor and stuff. Little directional details like that make such a difference. So this lighting in here is great. You know, we've got this like really harsh fluorescent lighting that really nicely highlights the enemies that are in here. But it's backed up by having this like set dressing that environment art's done beneath those lights. So you kind of got this like weapons maintenance cleaning station situation going on. And then that's deliberate. You know, you kind of justifying the gameplay with the environment art. And that's ultimately environment art's job, right? It's not just to make the levels look nice, it's to support the gameplay. And all this white, here we go. All this white stuff, this white paint that's kind of going from the floor to sort of 6 feet off the ground, that's, again, it's deliberate. You know, it's creating contrast so you can see the enemies clearly in like this quite dark, dingy space. And again, that is, you know, it's deliberate. It's in FPS games in particular. There's often this term. It's like the band of visibility, which essentially is like an area from the ground or maybe a foot off the ground to sort of 6 feet above the ground, where you want to have very clean sort of backdrop, so you can easily read players and pick them out and targets against the background. So you kind of want to leave it devoid of noise, right? So there's some nice stuff here as well. So intersections in games, you know, when you see like an asset or a prop that's been pushed to another prop and it has that really sharp sort of corner that looks really gamey, and unnatural, yeah, it's because nothing in life is as sharp as like a sort of intersection. Not even my wit is as sharp as a polygon intersection. So your job as environment artist essentially is to really try your best to hide and mask these. So, if you see an intersection, essentially it's an environment artist hasn't really done their job properly. Because there's no excuse for these. Sometimes you need them, but they should never be noticeable or obvious. So you can see here this kind of around the door, they've got like this nice plaster, sort of damaged plaster material. It's kind of just really tight to that edge. That's just hiding intersection. And then these kind of on the corners of the walls here, either side of the door, you've got like a little kind of strip of plaster. Again, that's just to hide the fact that there's like an intersection there. So really nice. Just little bits of polish like that are what separate, good from great, essentially. In environment art, you should always be thinking about how things connect together. And that's the key way to sort of avoid intersections, right? I think on this like railing that was just there, there's like a little base plate that goes onto the floor. And that kind of justifies the construction, right? And it makes it not only look nice, but it's more immersive. And then prefabs here. So let's go back a little bit actually. And pause right here. So prefabs don't just work on the scale of buildings, right? Prefabs also work at pretty much any scale. So you can see this fence here. This might just be the artist that's kind of copy and pasted stuff along to make the fence. But it's much more likely that this is a prefab. Because if you look closer, you can kind of see the repetition in this fence where, there's like a prefab where they've created this section of fence with the corrugated panel and the wood. And then they've duplicated along, right, to make the fence. And that's a time saver, but it also, again, consistency. You can hand this off to another artist who can then make the exact same fence as you have. And yeah, again, all the advantages of prefabs, they work at pretty much any scale. And these walls as well with the barbed wire on them, probably a prefab as well. It just saves you time on having to constantly do repetitive things. That's where prefabs really shine. And then obviously you can go in and kind of add detail on top of prefabs to really kind of mask that repetition. That's that's kind of the sort of last bits of detail you'll do is you'll create uniqueness within on the prefabs by kind of having stuff that you place that's outside of those packages. So you place one of those buildings and then you can put like a nice big poster on one of them or something like that. Just to really kind of make them feel, mask that repetition. Someone's leg's just poking through the wall there. That's not very good, is it? But I'm going to pause here once again. I know, a lot of pausing this one. But there's just so much going on here. And this is a great example of like noise being used effectively. So noise, it's often associated with like in a negative way. Whereas noise is actually a good thing, right? When it's used properly, which it has been here on this building here. So you can see you've got all this like detail, the sort of bullet holes, all that sort of micro detail. That's noise, right? And if that was spread across the entire building evenly, then yeah, that's noisy. That's a problem. But this is used compositionally. So generally in environment art, you kind of want to have a balance of detail. So you want to have, maybe 60-70% of your frame be kind of eye-rested, lower detail, lower sort of frequency of detail rather. And then you want to have like a medium sort of 20-30% where you've kind of focused more detail. And then you want to have like 10% of the frame sort of be like really high, contrasty, noisy detail. And, that's just visually pleasing without creating like noise that makes the scene unpleasant to look at. So essentially what you want to do is have big stuff backed up by medium stuff and then back up the medium stuff with small stuff, right? It's kind of just layering up detail, right? So you can see either side of this building, there's like, not as much sort of noise. You don't have those those bullet holes. And yeah, this is just kind of a well-composed building here. It's kind of telling a little story in that, a firefight took here or something. And yeah, it's just all about focusing the detail where it's needed and then letting other areas just kind of recede into the background to support, essentially. You can see it there again with the hole. That's like your 20% sort of detail, your medium form. And then you back it up with that high frequency detail, which is the rebar that's kind of poking through. You know, it's a really classic thing you see in games is rebar and concrete damage, but there's a reason for that, and it's because it looks good. You know, it's not only showing construction, it's also just visually pleasing. And yeah, also a great tip I give to people when they want to do destruction properly is imagine how it's constructed, because construction informs destruction, right? You know, you want to make it feel real by, you know, reflecting how it was constructed. So obviously, you know, reinforced concrete, rebar, rocket goes through it, blasts a hole in it, you got chunks of debris around it, but then you've got the rebar showing through as well. So yeah, top tip. Construction informs destruction. Remember that one. That's absolute gold. So something you'll notice that I want to point out is there's never perfectly straight lines in good environment art. And that's because nothing in life is perfectly straight. You can interpret that how you want, but it's a fact. So you can see here on this frame, look at that slight bowing in the roof line on the right. That's deliberate, right? If that was perfectly straight, it would feel off, you know? You got to have like little kind of breakup like that. You know, and it's the same for on the corners of walls in particular. You know, you can see on the left here, even though it's out of focus and blurring, there's a very slight wobble to that sort of edge of the wall where this plaster wall, right? And detail like that is critical to, you know, it's such an easy thing to add, but it adds so much to the realism of games. Yeah, it's because, you know, the silhouette of an object is the way you get the most bang for your buck with geometry detail. You know, if it's just a flat surface, often textures is just fine. But on the edges of the walls, textures can't affect that. You know, textures is just 2D, but geometry, yeah, you can actually break that silhouette. So really focusing detail around those edges, absolutely critical. You know, it's not just about poking the rebar out the concrete. It's about having those concrete edges be not perfectly straight. You know, you can back those up and supplement them with like normal maps, things like that would catch the light more, and, you know, just add that final little 10% detail we were talking about. You know, a lot of these wall pieces are probably just like modular, sort of, you know, prefabbed up things that you can duplicate around. But again, it's just quick, easy detail. And that's what games is about, right? Games is about doing the least, or doing the most with the least, right? Not just for performance, but for time and efficiency as well. Just kind of focusing those bullet decals around like the roof lines where the combat's taking place. Just kind of shows that that's where the, you know, people are standing on top of that rooftop, and then they're getting shot at. So the bullets are kind of hitting around that edge there. So it makes no sense to place those bullet decals around like the base of the building where no one's really going to be taking cover, you know. I mean, you can see those bricks there on the edge. You can even see them intersecting with the geometry, but it doesn't matter because, you know, it's kind of noisy, high frequency, you know, that's kind of an okay intersection because, you know, it's just supplementing the silhouette so much that it's kind of worth taking that hit. Yeah, we got little pops of colour from the signage as well, which is really nice. Signage is super important in games, you know, it's kind of, oh, I think I just spotted a perfectly straight edge there. Yeah, you see that wall behind this this guy's bum? You see that perfectly razor sharp edge? You see how much of a difference it makes between having that subtle wobble and that perfectly sharp edge? Try and avoid that at all costs. Ugh, so disgusting. Look at it. Ugh. Get rid.
Watch your fire! Friendly's moving up!
I mean, you can see the top of the walls here. It's, you know, slight wobble. Really nice. The thing you can notice here is all the detail is kind of pushed up against the bases of the walls and the buildings, and that's for two reasons. One, because, you know, it makes sense narratively that, you know, in terms of time, that when the plaster falls off, it's kind of accumulating around the base of the building. But also, you know, it's framing, it's giving you that geometry contrast that frames the player's path and kind of keeps the gameplay space kind of clean, so you know exactly where you need to go. Yeah, and then you can kind of supplement that by kind of adding foliage that's growing in amongst the debris that kind of implies it's been collected there for a while or what have you. You know, the point of environment art is environmental storytelling isn't just about giving a space a literal story, right? It's also about kind of giving the illusion that this space has existed like long before the player got here, right? So adding those little grounding details is just hints that time has been passing before the player even got to the space. You know, that's great for immersion, but it's just a great way to focus your set dressing as well, and, you know that you're doing the set dressing in the right places where it's going to give you the most sort of bang for your buck, because all this stuff takes time, right? And your time is a precious resource in games, particularly. I just want a lot of kudos with my producer there by saying that. Okay, now we're into a much different space here, you know, kind of gone through the chaos, now we're in much more sort of confined space. I just noticed a very well placed decal I'm going to talk about. You see this kind of scuffing on the floor that's kind of bending around the corner? This decal has been authored specifically to be like I like to call it directional grunge, right? And again, it's kind of introducing motion into the scene, but it's also guiding the player through it, you know, subtly, without having to point like a giant arrow saying go this way. Really good to have that directional noise. You know, tire tracks on a road are a good example of that as well. It just implies that life's been happening, which again, that just makes worlds feel more immersive and makes them feel right rather than just looking good. Yeah, the perfect environment art's about finding the perfect balance between making the scene feel right and making the scene look good. And I'm loving all this motion as well. So a lot of environment artists will work with visual effects artists, the effects artists who will take props that are made and then they'll turn them into sort of essentially objects that will blow up and stuff when you shoot them or they get damaged. And yeah, that's part of adding motion to a scene that is critical to making games feel right and not just look like kind of photographs. So this space is kind of just a giant playground for those scriptable objects.
Suppressing fire.
So this space has got a lot of noise in it, but it's all focused into clusters, right? Clusters of noise. So you got the desks essentially. They are sort of love the papers blowing up. It's classic. But yeah, essentially in environment art, there's a practice that you want to engage in, which is called clustering, which is essentially you kind of group bits of detail together, and then you leave a bit of iris in between those islands of detail. And that's exactly what's going on here, right? You kind of got the floor, which is nicely irised. There's, compared to the other parts of the level, there's not really much going on the floor. It's just kind of a carpet texture. But that's intentional, because if there was not, and the walls as well here, the walls are just a nice plain backdrop. And yeah, it's intentional, because otherwise the scene, it's the difference, as I said before, between noise that's tasteful and a noisy scene which isn't tasteful and looks bad. But it's also, yeah, it's confusing for the player when there's a lot of stuff going on visually. Like, you know, you can imagine if this wall had all this stuff on it, and the grunge and grime. It kind of removes that visual contrast that makes this space that's chaotic readable. Is he done yet? No. Couple more to clean up. There we go. Yeah, lovely little pops of colour from that sort of bright green stuff that's on the walls.
Yeah, there goes our boys.
Hoorah! Hoorah!
Nice little bit of a dip in the pacing, little bit of calm between the absolute chaos that has just taken hold.
No sign of Al-Assad, sir.
All right. Fall in, Marines. Stay frosty.
Stay frosty. Yeah, just such a nice clean space. Little palette cleanser before we get back into any action. And I think this is about to get gratuitous now with the amount of shooting. Yeah. I can hear the eagles screaming already. This is freedom distilled down. Triple distilled freedom with a side of cheeseburger and fries. Alright, we've got past the gratuitous bit, so something I've noticed here, you see that kind of strip of leaking that's going down the wall and under that kind of vent. Classic thing for showing age and environment is like having the leaks and drips and stuff under contact points. In my opinion, this isn't done very well here. I think a lot of times this sort of detail is just kind of placed because, oh, it's an overhang, I need to put a decal here. In reality, you want to kind of approach this more realistically, but, you know, we'll get into that another time. I've got to save some stuff for other videos, right? Yeah, lovely directional decal there. It's kind of leaning towards this door. And again, it was contrasting not through colour, but through more specular. Like, contrast isn't just a difference in colour. Contrast just essentially means difference, right? And there's different types of contrast in games and art in particular. There's like detail contrast, specular contrast. You know, essentially you want to break up flatness by adding contrast tastefully. You can see it on the windows here as well. The light just kind of catching that, you know, you look at it, there's not much color contrast going on here, but the lighting is making it sort of catch the light. It's a really nice little detail. I think we're done. Staring at Griggs.
Turn that off.
Roger that.
Though I was quite starstruck when I met for the first time when I was working at Infinity Ward, because, you know, to me he was just the character in Call of Duty when I was like 12, you know. Yeah, met him when I had a few drinks at the IW Holiday Party Bar. It's a great story that I won't tell here. And I think that's it. You know, Griggs he's actually quite a good rapper as well. Little known fact. I think he actually sings the ending credits song for this game. Anyway, that was Charlie Don't Surf. So a completely different mission to All Gillied Up, but so many different artistic techniques applied to sort of, you know, bring this level to life. You know, environment, art, design, narrative, all coming together. But I've just seen Vasquez's face is not looking good there. I think, yeah, might be a good time to call it. All right, well, let me know what you thought and what you'd like me to react to next. This is my channel where I'm going to be doing sort of environment art perspectives. So anything you want to know, ask me and let me know. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.